Hello, so this is my presentation on the inclusion of disabled students and whether their inclusion positively or negatively affects the general education students involved. Here are some pictures. On the top left you can see a student who is using some picture icons, and a teacher is doing hand over hand with him. And then we have some children with what I believe is cerebral palsy. And then also on the top right, a boy with Down syndrome with a neurotypical peer. So the word inclusion is a term used in the disabled community that defines whether or not a disabled person is included in events that are traditionally for the general neurotypical population. Here's a student in PE. So for my literature review, prior research brings up three main themes. Number one is inconsistent data. So not only is there a lack of research, but the research that has been done is inconsistent due to the fact that it's often on the opinions on whether children with disabilities should be included, which is usually done by simply asking and interviewing teachers and asking parents, and their views can be very different. So the data on special education so far, inclusion, is not on actual findings so much as it is on just opinions, and data of an opinion is only so useful in terms of actually implementing changes for children's lives. My second theme is positive outcomes on both disabled and neurotypical students. Context being the reason for systematic segregation of differently abled students from one another, meaning disabled versus general education being completely separated from each other, is because there is a belief that they must be separated. This second theme shows that the inclusion of students together can positively benefit both kinds of individual students. Students with disabilities who spend 80% or more of their time in a general education inclusive classroom do significantly better in both reading and math assessment than their peers who spend more time in separate special education classrooms. This is a citing from Carl A. 2021. Data shows disabled students can thrive in this environment, and neurotypical students also benefit from having a greater life perspective, positive and stronger empathy, and evolving social friendships. The third theme is a need for more resources. Not surprising. As inclusion becomes more widespread, a study in Mississippi by Clemens T. in 2024 showed that there was an alarming lack of inconsistency in teacher preparedness. A lack of consistency in teacher preparedness for students with disabilities joining their classroom. So as more inclusion becomes more commonplace, we're going to need more resources for these teachers so that they can be more prepared. This will benefit the teachers and the students alike. This shows the question of during K through 12, how often did you have classmates with disabilities in the same class as you? Cross-tabbing with, did you feel that exposure or inclusion to disabled students had any positive or negative effect on you, either personally or educationally? For example, did you feel it opened your eyes up to people with differences? Did it distract you from your studies, etc.? Now, the next couple of slides are going to show that even though I received about 30 responses for my survey, there is roughly only about 12 to maybe 20 responses on the actual important questions. So, for example, this question, neither positive or negative, comes to about 13, and 5 people said sometimes, 7 people said never, 1 person said often, and then the other side, somewhat positive, depending on how often they had students in their classroom, it comes up to about 6. And it varies so greatly because one person said they often had students and they had a somewhat positive outcome. Another person said they sometimes had them and they had a somewhat positive outcome. Another person said they never had them and they had a somewhat positive outcome. People in the neutral area ranged from having them sometimes to never having them, and one person said often. So very split, not significant. This is a chi-square test, asking the same question. This asks the question, when you were going through your K through 12 education, did you know what disabilities such as autism or Down syndrome were? About, I believe, I think it's 15 answered that they knew what both were. A couple knew autism, some knew Down syndrome, and a few people said they did not know of any of it, which is understandable. I also asked the question, do you have any disabled family members or friends? A surprising amount of people answered yes. Some people said more than one, and almost equal to the amount of people that said yes also said no. So again, very inconsistent in terms of data because it's hard to tell. Unless the survey results were going to go to one extreme, it's pretty much not consistent. If you answered having yes to having a family or friend with cognitive disabilities, were you at one point or are you now close with them? A couple people said they were close with them. One person said they used to be close with them. Some said they had family but were never close, family or friends. And then about half of them said they had had no friends or family that ever had those disabilities. This bar chart is asking the question, during your K through 12, how often did you have classmates with disabilities in the same class as you, which is the definition of inclusion. These students were being included. A good amount said sometimes, about 10 people. Let's say about 3 people said often. About, let's say 7 people said never. It's like one person said other. How often did you have classmates with disabilities in the same class as you? This is the number data, frequency percent, valid percent, cumulative percent. And then this asks, did you feel that exposure or inclusion to disabled students had any positive or negative effect on you personally? And cross-tabbing it with, did you ever socially interact with them? So the answer to this one was never on the survey. And this would show, did the people that never had interactions have a positive outlook on them? So maybe they were in the class with them, maybe the kids were included, but these students that are answering this question are saying that although those kids were included, they never had any social interaction with them, and this is their response. So one person said it was somewhat negative. I remember that this person said that one student was rumored or known to have pulled someone's hair, so at lunch they feared that that would happen to them. But the rest were either neutral or positive or extremely positive out of about 7 people. Did you ever socially interact with fellow students with disabilities? If so, how often? Answering sometimes on the survey. And did you feel it had an effect on you? And this is just giving different ways of looking at the data, but this is all the same question. This one is comparing the people that did have family or friends and how they felt. So similar to what I explained about the people that said that they had students with disabilities included but never interacted with them and how they felt it affected their studies. This is asking people who you could say have a bias or they have a pre-exposure because they have family or friends with disabilities. And it would be interesting to see how they perceived them, because obviously that depends on how their personality is. And there's only about 7 or 8 people that answered this question, but very neutral. Only one person responding negatively. So in conclusion, because there is not enough data, I fail to accept the hypothesis that inclusion has any positive or negative effect on general education students, as this research has given data that shows no significance. It does reaffirm that more research needs to be done on this topic, with a greater population sample for higher results and more qualitative measures, such as interviews and further observations. Because, as I may have mentioned, a good number of the response takers skipped very important questions, leaving most of the data being on just like gender, age, and what kind of school they went to. Thank you for watching.